And so we were all out, we were having fun, but I wasn't feeling it. I thought I could pretend, but I just wanted to go home. So I asked if anybody else was leaving soon so that I would have someone to walk home with. And one of the Navy midshipmen I sort of knew said he lived near me and was willing to walk me home. Well, I thought that we were, in this trusted circle, military. It's like an instant family. And so, I trusted him, but his intentions were not sincere.
Everyone has a story to tell.
Stories of hardship, stories of hope,
stories of doubt, stories of faith.
But no matter the story,
these diverse experiences of military life
can all be found at the intersection of faith, family, and profession.
This is OCF Crosspoint.
It's been just over a year since I interviewed Captain Amanda Yashack, United States Air Force Reserve. In fact, at that time, she was still Amanda Blaschko and was just weeks away from getting married. But before I share her story with you, I want to offer a warning because this episode deals with a topic that may affect some listeners. Part of Amanda's story involves trauma resulting from sexual assault. So if you have children around, if you've experienced a similar trauma, or if you might be around someone who has, please consider coming back to this episode later and using caution when listening. I'm going to share Amanda's story with you in two parts. In this episode, Amanda will talk about how her life spiraled out of control when she was in ROTC, largely as a result of the trauma she experienced, and then how that led to burnout, compartmentalizing her pain, and, as she calls it, rock bottom. And then in the next episode, you'll hear her story of hope and healing as God began doing a mighty work in her life. Okay, let's jump into my conversation with Amanda Yashack as she shares her story of military life at the intersection of faith, family, and profession.
Well, my accent and strange Midwestern sayings will be a dead giveaway, so there's no use coming up with my own cool story here. I was born and raised in Minnesota, and I moved away right after high school to attend college. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and then despite saying I would never move back to Minnesota, God, through his awesome humor and his many twists and turns my life has taken, here I am back in the land of 10,000 lakes. I am an Air Force reservist and apparently a glutton for punishment since I have somehow managed to PCS 4 times in just 9 years. I've gone through 2 formal education pipelines, first as a navigator and then as a pilot, and I've also deployed twice. So it's been a long 9 years.
So tell me about Minnesota and your family life. What was it like growing up there?
Well, all things considered, I really had a very good childhood. That being said, my parents divorced when I was 5 and each remarried a few years later. So there was definitely some difficulties pertaining to that. At the time, divorce didn't seem very common around me. So that was a little bit isolating as a kid. I thought kids at school maybe judged me for it, but my mom, who I spent the most time with, she was 100% dedicated to making sure that my younger sister and I were loved, provided for, and that we didn't miss out on anything just because she was a single parent. So that said, it also isn't normal for a kid to split time between their parents. It isn't normal necessarily to have a stepdad or stepsisters, but that was my life. So there were aspects of my childhood where I maybe had to grow up sooner than I would have liked. And while most of my prominent memories are fun-filled, those are my formative years and they've really shaped me. Some things for the good and some things that God has turned for the better, but they weren't always that way. One example of that would be that my mom and dad always told me I could be anything I wanted to be and do anything I put my mind to. And they always wanted me to do better for myself than what they did. And that's really the confidence I walked around with. That's how I lived my life. So as an adult and now as a Christian, I've had to learn a lot of humility, and I've had to learn how to let things go and not try to control everything around me, because those sayings can be life-shattering once you realize that we really aren't the ones in control. And then as far as faith goes, I grew up in a Roman Catholic church. We prayed the Hail Mary and Our Father before meals, especially with my grandparents. And I went to religion classes every Wednesday night all the way through my senior year of high school. But I couldn't say that we were really a religious family, and we certainly didn't have a relationship with Jesus.
So Amanda, why the military life for you, and specifically why the United States Air Force?
Well, like I said, my parents told me I could be anything I wanted to be when I grew up. And there were three things that I loved more than anything. It was adventure, adrenaline, and math. As a kid, and even as a teenager, I was never really understood by my peers. That's really probably why I don't like to go back and relive my childhood memories. But, thinking back, I always wanted something different than the narrative most people from my small town followed. I dreamed way bigger than anyone around me. When someone said to get a job, get married, have kids, my answer would be no, thank you. I always looked to the sky. I was always dreaming of a way to escape the mess here on Earth. I wasn't joking around when I determined that I wanted to be an astronaut. The summer after my freshman year of college, I decided I needed to get serious about this or give it up. I was already an engineering major, so that would help. But what else did I need to do? What could I be doing in the meantime? So I read a lot, and all it took was to learn that nearly all astronauts were former fighter pilots. And I really thought that was something I could do, a purposeful next step. So really, without much real contemplation, I walked over to the Air Force ROTC detachment on campus. I signed up without much fanfare, and I just got to work. Now, really quick, I realize that astronaut is the kind of dream that's cute when little kids say it. But when you hear it from a 20-year-old, it's a little shocking because they aren't a kid anymore. It's time for them to start being realistic and to grow up. But I was really very determined. And this dream didn't seem unrealistic for me at that time.
Well, let me jump in real quick and ask you, what do you think about the recent SpaceX launch?
Yeah. When I heard about that happening, I was like a little kid. It happened on my birthday. So I was already in a good mood. I went downstairs, I turned on the TV, I was glued to it. Man, what an endeavor. Those are just heroes. And it's just the kind of perseverance and the fortitude to do that. I mean, that just speaks right to my soul. That is who I was in those days. And so that was really fun for me to watch.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, well, let's shift back to your story and have you continue talking about why the military and why the Air Force.
Yeah, so by this point, the Air Force had me hook, line, and sinker. So even though I didn't want to be an astronaut anymore, I had already been going to ROTC for 2 years. So I loved the camaraderie. I loved the discipline. I loved the really high bar that was set for me that had never really been done for me before in my small town. And so I loved what my future looked like. The confident person that my parents raised me to be knew that I was really good at the military. Not only that, but my future was looking really good. I had my pilot slot. Nothing could knock me down. I was going to become exactly what I wanted to be. Not who I wanted to be, but what. And I say that very intentionally. But obviously, there is a world of difference between somebody who was literally aspiring to be an astronaut and the person who I described in my intro. A C-130 pilot, a reservist, not active duty, living back in my home state, and now aspiring to the narrative that I thought I was bigger than. So it was at this point that things really started spiraling out of control in a way that, man, nobody would have seen coming. Like a lot of engineering majors, I took 5 years to graduate instead of the typical 4. So let me take you back to my 4th year in ROTC. I was excelling in my classes. I was the cadet wing commander. I got to lead my peers in what I thought were very meaningful lessons. And I had just received my pilot slot. So I was on top of the world. Then one day rolled around that would change the trajectory of my life forever. It started off as a normal day, taking our PT test for the semester. I had been training really hard and was sure that this was going to be the day that I finally maxed my PT test. They were calling out times as people crossed the finish line. And when I heard my time, I blurted out this profanity. And this was very, very uncharacteristic of me. But I was mad for some reason. And it was a type of anger that I couldn't describe. I didn't know where it was coming from. I missed the time to get a perfect score by 6 seconds, and that just enraged me. But I couldn't really tell you why in the moment. So I crossed the finish line and I didn't stop running. I just kept going right into the women's restroom where I just sat in the stall sobbing. And it only took me a couple minutes, but all of a sudden I was putting all these pieces together in my head. And I knew why I was not just mad, but I was furious and I was confused. And I felt like something was robbed from me. Eventually, a roommate of mine and a fellow cadet got me to talk, and she convinced me that I needed to share what I had just told her with our cadre. We were now in a conference room in the ROTC building. I was hesitant and not thinking clearly. My cadre were sitting there, intently waiting to hear where this unexpected outburst and all the tears came from. Like I said, this was uncharacteristic. I felt guilty for not meeting their expectations and thought that they had a right to know what I was dealing with. And so under that pressure, I told them something very, very personal, something very difficult, and something at that time, I honestly didn't even want to share with them, but I felt obligated to.
And what was that?
Just over a year earlier, I had been sexually assaulted by another cadet in my ROTC detachment. My outburst came from not understanding why this person who violated me and who took something from me that they shouldn't have could be allowed to stay in and torment me. And they couldn't even pass a PT test. And here I was trying my hardest to max it. And all the little victories that I had won over the past year told me that I was good enough and not a victim, and that they couldn't take my dream away. But this time, I didn't have a victory. I was defeated by 6 seconds on a 1.5 mile run, and my whole world crumbled. But it didn't all come down during that one PT test. I had been building a world on a foundation of sinking sand for a long time. Mentally, I had to see this person once a week, and so I just had to shut them out. I wish I'd taken the time to deal with the trauma that I went through, but I never did. I was a ticking time bomb. So this all went down in the spring of 2008. And I don't recall that back then we heard sexual assault briefings like we have them now. We didn't have a SARC on campus, and the one assigned to our detachment was 8 hours away at Scott Air Force Base. And I only learned about that after the fact. I didn't know the difference between restricted and unrestricted reporting. And now, since I just blurted out my story under pressure, under the feelings of shame and guilt, I just blurted out my story to my commander. I had just opened up a can of worms, and automatically an investigation started. It was an investigation that I was not prepared to go through. It was one that should have been kept private, but every cadet in the detachment knew about it. I muscled through that spring, through the investigation, and when summer came, I carefully stuffed all the little broken and shattered pieces back inside and prepared for my 5th year.
What was the outcome of that investigation?
So the person who had assaulted me was discharged from the Air Force, but it was for a different reason. It was not because they had assaulted me, but because they failed to meet standards in other areas. So my intention of sharing was to make sure that this person wasn't going to be allowed to serve in the military again. Since all this has happened, I've learned that they have, in fact, rejoined the military. And so that's kind of something that's come up in the last couple of years. Yeah, at the time, they were separated, but because it was not for the real reason, they have now been allowed to join and serve again.
Wow, that must have been extremely difficult. I can't even begin to imagine how that made you feel. Go ahead and tell me about that 5th year. What was that like?
Yeah, so for those listening who aren't ROTC, a lot of you know, usually 5th year cadets are engineering majors, and they are just trying to finish their senior design project so that they can graduate and commission. So cadre usually don't expect a whole lot from you except to show up to lead lab and PT because they know that you're focused on school and you've already put in your required 4 years. And so this was exactly the boat that I thought I was in, except my cadre didn't let me coast. They began to tighten the screws right back down on me, but this time even further. And what do I mean by that? Well, that fall, I was totally in charge of organizing a multi-service, multi-detachment, multi-state field training exercise. When that was over, I thought I would be left alone for the rest of the year. But next, they asked me to organize a base visit and a Commandant's Challenge for the spring. I already wasn't sleeping, and I was spending 40 hours a week just on my senior design project, and my teammates still thought I was slacking on them. I was physically in shape, but in danger of not being able to pass my PT test because I physically lacked the energy to do it. I was dating someone at the time, and we took a triathlon class together, and he ended up cheating on me with another girl in the class. So then I had to endure 3 days a week for the rest of the semester with a cheating ex and this other girl. So I started not even being able to drag myself out of bed to go to my classes. I was the definition of burnt out. I asked my cadre to let up on me to ease some of my requirements. I thought, hey, couldn't this triathlon class count as PT? Haven't I already met all my requirements? But they wouldn't let up. To this day, I don't really know why. I couldn't understand why my cadre didn't notice what was happening. To me, it all seems so obvious. If anybody listening right now has been in this place, they know it's very, very dark. If you have anything that you haven't dealt with, it is not a matter of if, but when it is going to bubble to the surface. So all those tiny pieces, broken pieces that I had stuffed back in, they came back out, and the place I was in got even darker.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I had not dealt with the sexual assault that had happened to me. And so I was trying to live my normal day-to-day life and pretend like nothing had happened. And so one night I went out with a bunch of friends. A lot of them were seniors from different ROTC branches on campus who I had gotten to know from this joint field training exercise that we had just done, that I had just organized in the fall. And so we were all out, we were having fun, but I wasn't feeling it. I thought I could pretend, but I just wanted to go home. So I asked if anybody else was leaving soon so that I would have someone to walk home with. And one of the Navy midshipmen I sort of knew said he lived near me and was willing to walk me home. Well, I thought that we were, in this trusted circle, military, it's like an instant family. And so, I trusted him, but his intentions were not sincere. And I, once again, found myself a victim of sexual assault at the hands of another soon-to-be military officer. I was left alone in the rain with no idea how to get back to my house. I had rug burns up and down my spine. And so the following week at PT, when we had to do sit-ups, I was in pain and bleeding through my PT shirt. Multiple people innocently pointed this out to me, not knowing the trauma that they were reminding me of. That same week, just a few days after I was assaulted, we had joint PT with all 3 branches, and attendance was mandatory. And I overheard the person who assaulted me bragging about what he had done with his fellow midshipmen, who then high-fived him. One of them came over and asked me if I knew who he was talking about, and all he would say was that the girl was Air Force. And I just responded. I said, I don't know, but if you find out, please let me know so I can ensure he has to pay for what he did. And I was laughed at. And I knew that I didn't have it in me to withstand another investigation, especially after the first one just, went so horribly. So at this point, I became just a shadow of a person. I started as a cadet who had dreams that were out of this world. I was born a fighter. I was smart and capable and confident. And that morning at PT, something inside me it completely broke. I stopped showing up to events. My roommates told my cadre that I barely left my room. And eventually they asked me if I wanted to continue in ROTC or if I needed to resign my commission. I wrote my intention to disenroll in, the perfect memorandum for record format that they teach you. And that was probably the clearest my head had been in a long time.
Okay, so you've gone from this very, very dark place to what you called this moment of clarity, the clearest that you've been in a while. I mean, at what point do you say, what in the world is going on here? This isn't what I expected for my life.
Yeah.
And then what sort of response did you get whenever you submitted the letter?
Yeah, it was a moment of clarity for me because I realized I could continue in ROTC, but then I would run the risk of not graduating and I would lose my commission anyway. I thought that if I did commission somehow miraculously, that I was about to attend pilot training and I was not in any condition to safely get into an aircraft with someone. And so it was a moment of clarity because the gravity of the situation was upon me, but I knew that there was only one answer to everything. And that was to resign my commission. I still wanted to serve my community. And I will tell you that desire to be a pilot never left me. Those things were always and still are a part of me. And so that clarity came from just knowing what I had to do, but not giving up hope. And so when I gave this memo to my cadre, part of that hope that I had was that maybe they would read it and understand that when I had been asking for the pressure to be let up, it wasn't to take the easy way out. It was because I sincerely needed that. And I hoped that maybe now all of the things that I had done over the past 4 years would be enough for them to say, you know what? We should have listened. We should have taken the pressure off. Let us do that now for you. let us get you help. I mentioned I should have gotten help, but I didn't.
Right.
I really hoped that that was the route that they would take, but they basically right then and there, I don't even know if they took the time to read the memo, but they took out their pen and they signed it, and that was the end of it. And just like that, I was honorably discharged on January 13th, 2009, before I even got to begin my career.
That's tough, Amanda. And I know that's not how you or anyone dreams that their military career will go. I'd like to hear what happens next.
So a few months later, I did eventually graduate. I had to beg my senior design professor to just let me pass his class if I promised to never be a real engineer. I didn't mention it, but I ended up hating my major. I didn't want to design airplanes. I wanted to fly them. And yeah, that desire didn't go away just because I lost my shot in the Air Force. And so I graduated in 2009. There had never been a plan B. There was only plan A, to be a pilot in the Air Force. And if you remember, 2009, we were in the throes of a recession. So I couldn't even get an interview, much less try to convince someone in an interview that I wanted to be hired. So it was rough going for a little bit. And slowly, like the scrappy fighter I describe myself as, who's in the 9th round of a fight, I just start picking myself back up. I looked into the reserves in Minneapolis and started putting together an application package to be a C-130 pilot. I even went and got my private pilot's license, even though I was going to graduate debt-free, and now I found myself suddenly $60,000 in debt from the scholarship I had to pay back and all the tuition that I immediately had to assume. I had no idea what I was doing, but I really have never been able to take no for an answer. So I went through the interview process in Minneapolis. They basically told me I was a shoo-in, that they would hire me. But when the actual call came in, I didn't get the news that I wanted on the other end. They said the board decided to hire someone else from the squadron who put a package in at the 11th hour. And they said that they would just never hire someone off the street ahead of someone who is already in the squadron who's qualified. They told me if I wanted to be a navigator, they'd hire me right now. I could go to training, and if I did really well and still wanted to be a pilot, that they would send me to pilot training. It really wasn't the news I wanted to hear. I felt like I was kicked all the way back to square one. If I could describe my situation at the time, I was living with my mom back in my hometown. I was coaching 9th grade fast pitch and substitute teaching during the day and working at an FBO at a tiny airport at night. And I kept sitting there thinking, seriously, I have a degree in rocket science. What am I doing? What's happening? And I would continue to ask myself that question for the next 6 years. I did accept that navigator slot with the hopes of eventually going to pilot training. I was a distinguished graduate from nav training. I had the best drop scores in the squadron. And when the scheduler needed a nav, I never said no. And so finally, when my time came up to submit a pilot application, I thought again, I would be a shoo-in. Why wouldn't they send me? I was told every excuse in the book about why they wouldn't send me. One of the times we were sitting down and discussing it, my commander told me, well, we know you left ROTC for, and I'll put air quotes, for emotional reasons. And so we just don't think that you'll be able to handle pilot training. And, I had never shared what happened to me because I didn't want to be seen as a victim. And I especially didn't want pity or to be hired because somebody felt bad. I wanted to be hired on my merits and my merits alone. But even the best wasn't good enough to my leadership at the time. And so, all along I had motivated myself to do well by telling myself, Amanda, if you can just get those pilot wings, you'll get back what was taken from you. And so when I was told time and time again that they wouldn't send me to pilot training, I eventually started believing the lie that I just wasn't good enough and that I would never get that stolen part of me back and that I wasn't worthy of love. And I began to sort of self-sabotage. So, we're on the road a lot as C-130 crews, and I began to drink too much. I got myself into a really terrible and emotionally manipulative relationship. And I just made a lot of really bad decisions. And then one day I looked in the mirror, like really, really looked, and I didn't recognize myself. And that was finally my rock bottom. This fighter I had no fight left in me.
If you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, please get help. If you're unsure about where to get help, consider starting with the National Sexual Assault Hotline. They offer confidential 24/7 support, and their number is 800-656-4673. Join me next episode when Amanda shares the rest of her story. OCF Crosspoint is a production of Officers Christian Fellowship. For more information about OCF, check us out online at ocfusa.org or find us on Facebook and Instagram at OCFUSA. This episode was hosted and produced by me, Josh Jackson. Audio cleanup and repair was done by Michael Jerry of Mighty Productions. If you have an idea for a guest, topic, or story that you think should be considered on a future episode, send an email to podcast@ocfusa.org. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us for the next episode of OCF Crosspoint.